because it imposes huge costs and risk on future generations. To overcome this market failure, they argue we need to internalize the cost of future environmental damage by putting a price on the thing that causes it, namely carbon pricing. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Wulan Reyhana, and today I'll unveil the potential of carbon tax implementation in Indonesia. I've divided my presentation into three sections. The first section is introduction. We will talk more about Indonesia climate change risk, and then we will move to the next session, which is carbon economy, that consists of Indonesia financing in greenhouse gases reduction. And I'll continue by carbon tax implementation. I will elaborate more about the utilization of state revenue. And to finish, I will talk about the Indonesia current condition of carbon tax. And the last section will be conclusion. So that would be overall structure of my presentation. And now let's move on to the first point. Indonesia climate change risk. Indonesia is considered as a very vulnerable to the climate change. Climate change can increase hydrometeorology disaster risk, which is currently reached 80% of the total disaster happening in Indonesia. And also in the economy sector, Indonesia potential economic losses can reach 0.66% up to 3.45% of GDP in 2030. Indonesia is also have projected the emission until 2030, and without ambitious emission reduction movement, it will be potentially increased 2 degrees Celsius of temperature before 2050. Indonesia demonstrated its commitment to tackle climate change by ratifying Paris Agreement in April 2016, and also plan NDC Indonesia and also participate in COP20 and G20 Indonesia. Not only ratifying a Paris Agreement, Indonesia also needs a funding. Energy sector is the sector that emits emission more than another sector. To in line with NDC mitigation roadmap, energy and transportation sector need 3,500 trillion rupiah, and in total for all sector it will need 3,779.63 trillion rupiah. On the other hand, we can see that the oil and gas companies are trying to invest in a renewable energy. Therefore, it is hoped that Indonesia can have a conducive climate for investors to invest in Indonesia. And it will be guaranteed by security to incentive from the government or through carbon pricing. And now, how Indonesia finance its greenhouse gases reduction activities? There are two main scenarios, which are market-based mechanism and non-market-based mechanism. In the market-based mechanism, there are emission trading system and crediting mechanism. For emission trading, also known as a cap and trade, is a cost-effective way of reducing greenhouse gas emission. To incentivize firms to reduce emission, a government set a cap on the maximum level of emission and creates permits or allowance for each unit of emission allowed under the cap. The country that already implemented the emission trading system is China, Switzerland, and Europe. Meanwhile, in the crediting mechanism, there are a lot of mechanisms such as FERA, CDM, and etc. And each mechanism have their own rule. And the next is non-market-based mechanism, which consists of carbon tax and result-based payment. A carbon tax put a price on those emissions to encourage consumer business and governments to produce less emission. Meanwhile, in the result-based payment, the company who seek to reduce the emission will get incentive from the government. Let's examine the carbon tax implementation in more depth. There are cap and trade and cap and tax. Cap and trade is a system that limits aggregate emission from a group of emitters by setting a cap. When the companies emit more than a cap, the company has to buy a certificate from the company who emit emission less than a cap. Meanwhile, in the cap and tax, the company who emit more emission than a cap have to pay for the tax. The carbon tax implementation is under the legal foundation like a law number 7 2021 concerning harmonization of tax regulation and presidential decree number 98 2021 concerning the implementation of NEK. And now I'd like to elaborate on the utilization of state revenue from carbon tax. The revenue from carbon tax is used for increased fund for development and then adaptation and mitigation. As I've already mentioned before, like hydrometeorological disaster, and the revenue from carbon tax is helped to mitigate the risk. And then climate change, environmentally friendly investment like a green industry or green chemistry, renewable energy, and etc. And last, the carbon tax revenue is used for support for low-income communities in the form of social assistance to make sure the transition will just and orderly. Okay, let's cover the Indonesia carbon tax implementation. Next, I'd like to move on and discuss the current condition of Indonesia carbon tax. First, the Indonesia government has decided to defer the implementation of its carbon tax to July from its original plan in April due to the global economic turmoil and ongoing disruption to the energy sector. And also, Indonesia authorities have faced criticism from environmentalists that the rate of its proposed carbon tax at 30,000 rupiah per ton of CO2 equivalent will be too low to discourage the burning of coal for power. Okay, that's bring us to the end of my presentation. In brief, government have to work seriously to implement the carbon pricing and not defer carbon tax implementation anymore to enhance the funding for the renewable energy sector. And carbon tax policy doesn't stand alone, but it is a comprehensive policy package for emission reduction and a stimulus for the transition to a more sustainable economy. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your interest and attention. If anyone who would like more information or has a question, please feel free to contact me at wulanray@gmail.com. Thank you.